think hope is really, not only Hope who introduced me, but I think hope is really the key to this whole issue. And you'll hear my presentation in a second, but I think we have to understand what's happening in this culture. This is a culture that is losing hope and meaning. This is a culture where people are lonely, more lonely than ever before. This is a culture where people feel that their life has lost meaning, purpose, or value. Our lives are threatened when we're in a situation where we feel that there's no purpose to living because we're easily convinced that life should be ended. And this is what's happening in my country. So what's happening in the culture is we've got more loneliness than ever before. We know that, and it's very sad to see so many lonely people, so many people who have lost their way. They feel that their life has lost meaning, purpose, or value. But the reality is that we need to bring hope to this culture. You're going to build a culture of life by living your faith and by giving hope to others, by being that visual and also that, how would you say, the person who makes a difference in someone's life, such as the young lady just before us who's been at the abortion center saving lives. So when we're talking about assisted suicide, I want to create a paradigm for you that you'll be very effective in talking about it. Because a lot of these things go where someone says, well, how do you talk about assisted suicide? For instance, I was just on I did a webinar on Tuesday with a bunch of medical students here in the U.S., and I'm in Canada, so I did a webinar with them. And I had the one medical student ask me, he said, Alex, I'm totally opposed to assisted suicide, but when I get that question, what about the person who's suffering so terribly and they're approaching death? They're nearing death already. Why is that so wrong? He says, I know it's wrong to kill people, but it's a very difficult point. And of course I said to him, well, I agree that difficult cases are hard to deal with, obviously. This is a difficult case. Someone's suffering. We don't want to suffer. We're human. None of us want to suffer. I said, but we have to deal with the question for what it's about. We have to make sure we're dealing with it exactly for what the issue is about. We are opposed to killing people. I'm opposed to killing people. So, if we start, I said sometimes we make things too complicated. We want to talk about pain and symptom management. We want to talk about all these other things we can do to help somebody. And all that's important. Don't get me wrong. It's all very important. But I'm opposed to killing people. I'll tell you another little story. I was on a bus recently. I was coming back to London, Ontario from Toronto. It was near the end of COVID, so it was about a year ago. And I couldn't get a flight back. I was flying from somewhere, and I was at the Toronto airport. I had to take a bus back to London. And I'm sitting on the bus, and beside me is one of the football players from our local university. And we're talking, and he's telling me all the things he's doing and everything. We're making a connection, right? He and I were talking. We're making a connection. He seems really comfortable talking to me. And then he asked me what I do for a living. And I said to him, I run the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. And he says, oh, what's that? He might have thought I was dealing with, dogs or something. I don't know. And I said, I'm opposed to killing humans. I'm opposed to killing people. And he was quiet. He's sitting there quiet, And then he starts asking me a whole bunch of the difficult questions, right, about it. And I said to him, well, let's just put it this way. I'm opposed to killing people. And I think it's a very bad idea to give someone the right and law to kill me. And he was quiet. And then he said, I agree with you. Sometimes we have to keep our arguments to the point. We can get into lots of things. So they're selling us assisted suicide based on this idea that people are suffering. They're saying people are suffering. They're nearing death. It's only going to be for those very few people who are so suffering and nearing death that we're really only eliminating maybe a few weeks of their life at the most. What are they actually talking about doing? They're trying to convince the world that they're eliminating suffering. That's what they're doing. It's my body, my choice, and we're eliminating suffering. That's what they're selling. And they view assisted suicide within the paradigm of suicide. And now you may say, but that helps us, and I agree. Most of us have had a bad experience with suicide in our life. I had a friend who died by suicide when I was a teenager, and you carry that pain with you all of your life. So I understand that. But we also, in a culture, look at suicide as a situation where someone decided themselves. So they're selling it as my body, my choice, right? And they justify assisted suicide, as I say, based on the idea that we're only reducing their life by a few weeks maybe, that's it. And they're suffering, so we're eliminating the suffering. And guess what? None of us want to suffer. Sorry, Father, none of us want to suffer. Nothing personal. Many people are uncomfortable with assisted suicide, but they don't want to die a bad death. Okay? So why do we oppose assisted suicide? Well, because it's knowingly prescribing lethal drugs for the purpose of killing someone. We're intentionally involved with killing someone. What the law does is it gives someone the right in law to be involved directly in killing you. And, you have to understand, assisted suicide is about, somebody at a difficult time of their life, and somebody else now is saying, I agree, your life is not worth living. Here, we'll give you these lethal drugs, and you can die by assisted suicide. And they want to change the language, as you know. Legalizing assisted suicide, what do these laws actually do? You have to read the laws, right? The language is everything. What does the law actually do? So they say it's all about my choice. Well, yes, someone by law would have to request it. That's true. But that's where their involvement ends. Because the law is all about, if you read these bills, they're all the same way. The laws in Oregon and Washington State, they're all the same thing. They're about the rules that doctor or nurse must follow in order to cause your death. That's what they're about. They're about giving doctors and nurses the right in law to be involved with killing you. So where is this legal in the U.S.? Well, it's legal, sadly, in California, Colorado, Hawaii, Maine, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont, Washington State, and the District of Columbia. It's also technically legal in Montana. Montana's a little bit different. They had a court case in 2009. It was the Baxter case. And the court in Montana decided that they did not strike the assisted suicide law, but what they did is they granted something called a defense of consent. Okay? So if the doctor assists the suicide, he has to prove that the person consented. There's at least 10 states right now in the U.S. debating assisted suicide. In 2023, though, we do have very big concerns, really, really big concerns. I'm not saying Illinois is not a concern. You don't have a bill yet here, but I do predict you're going to get one very soon, if not this year, certainly next year. We are primarily concerned right now with Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, and New York. New York might not be as big a deal this year, only because of the fact that the election in New York, funny enough, went, interestingly, in a good way. There was a lot of radical people elected in New York who lost the last election. The Montana bill, there was a Montana bill that just died, sadly, and it was to reverse the Baxter decision. The good news is Virginia has already defeated their assisted suicide law. The good news is that in 2022, there were no new states that legalized assisted suicide. And if you think about that, that's actually significant because the Compassion and Choices, the assisted suicide lobby, put millions of dollars in last year thinking they were going to get a couple states, and they got nothing. So that's good news. And while the media is trying to tell you that there's this big roller coaster in favor of assisted suicide, I remind people every bill was defeated last year. But as you know, they win one state, and suddenly there's a roller coaster of people wanting to legalize assisted suicide, is how the media would sell it. Connecticut defeated assisted suicide last year by one vote in the Judiciary Committee, only one vote, and Connecticut has faced a bill 10 years in a row. They have another bill this year. Anyway, what's going on with the assisted suicide issue you need to be aware of? Well, obviously, the assisted suicide lobbies also, not only have they been pushing to legalize assisted suicide in more states, where it's legal, they've been expanding those laws. So they tell you, oh, we're going to have all these safeguards, guardrails, so therefore it'll only be for those few people. Once they legalize it, what do? They expand the laws. Now, you might say, but Alex, the assisted suicide law in Oregon was there for a very long time before they expanded it, and that's true. But remember, Oregon was the experiment state. They had to hold on to that state and make it look like it's controlled there in order for other states to legalize. And so when it came to the point where they thought they had, how would you say, a bit of a strength, I would say more people supporting assisted suicide, they've also now been expanding in Oregon. So there's right now bills in Washington State and Hawaii and Oregon and in Vermont to expand assisted suicide. Bills in, I'll get into that in a minute. Oregon recently removed their residency requirement. I'm going to get into that in a minute. So that means what happened now? Assisted suicide has been a state issue, now it's a national issue. I have bad news for you. Everybody in Illinois can die by assisted suicide right now in Oregon, right? Because the residency requirement's been removed. And Vermont also passed their assisted suicide expansion bill last year, which allowed assisted suicide by telehealth. So now just think about it. Now in Vermont, you never have to see a doctor, but you can die by assisted suicide. So what is the assisted suicide lobby pushing? Yes, they're pushing more states, such as Illinois, such as I say, New York, Massachusetts, etc., Connecticut. They want to legalize in more states. But they're also trying to expand their laws. I'm going to get into that in a second. They want to do that by eliminating waiting periods. So the original Oregon law had a 15-day waiting period. In 2019, the bill that passed in 2019 allowed the doctor to waive the waiting period so you could have a same-day death. They want to redefine who can do assisted suicide, because originally in Oregon it was only doctors, right? I shouldn't say only, but you know what I mean. The new laws include nurses and doctor assistants and all these other people, and the reason they want to have more people involved with doing assisted suicide is because they had the problem of too few doctors were willing to do assisted suicide. So if you expand who can do it, then obviously speaking, you'll have more people offering it. They want to eliminate the residency requirements, so they want to allow assisted suicide they want to have assisted suicide clinics, so you'd be able to go to another state and die by assisted suicide. Now, why is that so important? Well, they're well aware that they're probably never going to legalize assisted suicide in Louisiana and Texas and North Dakota. They're probably never going to legalize assisted suicide in those states, but they want to make sure they can kill people in those states. They want to allow death by lethal injection. That's euthanasia. They're launching court cases to claim that there's a right to assisted suicide. They've been trying to permit assisted suicide by telehealth. They're trying to change the definition of who can die by assisted suicide by making it only chronic conditions. So I can get into that with you in a second also. And they want to establish regional assisted suicide centers, which I've already mentioned to you. Now, just to give you some information, in Oregon in 2021, so I don't have the 2022 data from Oregon yet, but Oregon's a good state to look at the data because it's been legal there since, more than 20 years. And in Oregon in 2021, there was 383 lethal prescriptions written, and they said 238 people reportedly died by assisted suicide. Now, I said reportedly because there was probably a lot more, but we don't have a report. How do I know that? So in 2021, if you look at the report, there was 106 deaths. So there was 106 people of the 383 who had received a lethal prescription, who they have a death certificate for, so they know they died, but they have no idea how they died. So how the law works in Oregon is if the doctor never sends in the report after someone died by assisted suicide, if the doctor who's supposed to send in the report never sends in a report, the Oregon government never gave the Oregon Health Authority any investigation power or rights. So therefore, you just never know. We don't know. There was 106 people who died in 2021 who received lethal prescriptions. They did die, but we have no idea how they died. Now let's think about that. How good should you feel about that? Let's say we were talking about, how would you say, some sort of heart drug. And so if there was, in Illinois, 106 people who received a heart drug, and we know they died, but we have no idea how they died, you'd be a bit concerned about that heart drug, wouldn't you? You'd say, what do you mean we have no idea how these 106 people died? Well, now we're talking about assisted suicide. And that number is going up every year because in 2020 it was only 80. The time of death in Oregon, so when I look at the data from 2019, it was between 1 minute and 47 hours. Well, no one dies in 1 minute, sorry. They don't die. They might have gone into coma in 1 minute. I'm not going to get into how the drugs work, but anyway. And the longest time of death in Oregon has been 104 hours. So this is supposed to be a death with dignity. And can you imagine you're laying there for 104 hours dying? I'm not going to get into Monty Python. Anyway, two people in 2021 were referred for a psychiatric or psychological assessment. Honestly, do you think that only two out of 383 people, because 383 people received the lethal drugs, only 2 people were going through some sort of psychological or psychiatric type of a condition? Like imagine, let's honestly look at this. People approaching death and what happens as a human person, how we experience the emotions and the psychological feelings around as death is approaching. One person in 2021 was referred to the Oregon Medical Board for failure to comply with the law. We don't have more information about that because this is all under privacy. So as I mentioned, in 2019, Oregon Governor Kate Brown, that was the first law where they expanded. So in 2019, they gave doctors the right to waive the waiting period. So that means if they deemed you to be terminally ill and approaching death, they could give you a same-day death in Oregon. So if you look at the 2021 data, of the 238 reported assisted suicide deaths, 81 of those, the waiting period had been waived. Just information. Washington State and Hawaii have also been debating right now expansion laws, Vermont, and I get into that. New Mexico passed a law in 2021, which is already an expanded bill. It was the most extreme bill in America. The Minnesota bill actually has a lot of similarities. The current Minnesota bill that just came out last week has a lot of similarities to the New Mexico law, which is very extreme. I'm not going to get into that. So let's talk about how this works. They say these laws have oversight. There's oversight of the law. Let's think about this. How the law works is the doctor, so first of all, let's say you've requested assisted suicide. If a doctor has approved your assisted suicide, a second doctor has to sign off. Now in some states it's also nurses, right? Just so you know. But a second doctor has to sign off. The second doctor doesn't even have to meet you. They have to approve that what the first doctor has said. So usually the second doctor is only looking at the medical record and signing off. So any of these assisted suicide doctors who are heavily involved in assisted suicide, they have their friendly doctor who signs off. It's no different than other issues that we might talk about where they might say, oh, well, you know, another doctor said it was okay and approved it. Then the same doctor who approved you can also then write your prescription for the lethal dose, and that same doctor is the one that's required by the law to send in the report. So what is this? This is a self-reporting system. So when you're coming late to a pro-life meeting and you're going down the highway at some crazy speed, are you calling the police to come pick you up because you broke the law? So it's a self-reporting system. So they say there's oversight of the law. There's no oversight of the law. When you're looking at the reports out of Oregon, Washington State, and you're looking at the data came from where? The doctor who wrote the prescription is also the doctor who sends in the report. And as I've already said, quite a few doctors aren't even sending in the reports. Okay. Washington State legalized assisted suicide in 2009. They're currently debating an expansion bill. They're trying to allow non-physicians to do assisted suicide. Well, I've already mentioned, for instance, New Mexico allows nurses to do it. They're trying to shorten the waiting period from 15 days to 7 days, but then they also want to allow a waiving of the waiting period when someone's nearing death. And they're allowing also, the bill would allow lethal drugs to be sent by courier or by the mail. Now think about this. During COVID, when you were ordering stuff from Amazon, and they were showing up on your doorstep, and then you complained because somebody in the neighborhood saw that being dropped off and they thought they wanted to steal the box on your front step. Now they're going to send lethal drugs to the mail? Think about it. Isn't it a bit of a crazy idea? Anyway, the California bill in 2021 also reduced safeguards. I'm not going to get into all this. We're just going to pass by it. So there's been court cases. So you might say, oh, well, you know, Alex, I should first explain to you this difference. So in Canada, we have euthanasia. Euthanasia is lethal injection. It's homicide. So assisted suicide is the same idea. It's just, and it's done with the same drugs. The difference is that with assisted suicide, the doctor prescribes you the lethal drugs, but you have to take it yourself. So you can see there's a difference in it, but the difference is not in the intention, nor is it in the outcome. The difference in how it's done. Euthanasia, sadly, would be more effective for killing, because having a doctor lethally inject you will ensure that there's probably not going to be any error, that you'll be dead pretty quick. So anyway, with assisted suicide, you can see there could be some problems with it if someone is taking the drug and it's a horrible drug to drink, like it's horrific, crappy stuff. And my French isn't very good, so I got to watch what I say. And the fact of it is that you could see how maybe someone only was able to drink down half the lethal drugs, and then they passed out, and they might not die, or it might take forever for them to die. But with euthanasia, obviously, the doctor's injecting you, right? I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying you can see the differences. But, you know, California had a court case recently on conscience rights, and they won that case, which is very good. So California, when they amended their assisted suicide law in 2016, they amended it to affect doctors' conscience rights. So what the law said is that the doctor doesn't have to do assisted suicide. But what they had to do is when someone asked for assisted suicide, that would be counted as a first request, even if the doctor wanted nothing to do with assisted suicide. So the law said any request for assisted suicide was the first request. So that meant doctors who were opposed to killing people were having to be complicit with the law. The law defined them as being complicit with the law. So the doctors who were opposed to assisted suicide, the Catholic Medical Association, the Christian Medical Dental Society, they took that to court and they won because they had the freedom of speech to say, I don't want to participate. There was the Shavelson case in California. Shavelson is a doctor who does assisted suicide, and he decided that he thought that we should be legalizing euthanasia. So he challenged the assisted suicide law in the courts, and he said that the assisted suicide law has a discrimination factor because certain people have a very difficult time self-ingesting because of their medical condition. So because it's very difficult for them to self-ingest, we need euthanasia. For those purposes, it'd be easier to inject them. The court did reject that, thank God. There was the Kleigler case in Massachusetts. So Dr. Kleigler in 2016 launched a court case in Massachusetts saying there's a right to assisted suicide in Massachusetts. And so what he was saying is he's a doctor who had cancer, and he said that because he was terminally ill, therefore he wanted assisted suicide, and he said according to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, according to the Massachusetts Constitution, he technically has a right to assisted suicide. The court disagreed with him. What made it even more interesting is the decision came down in December of last year, and Dr. Kleigler's not only still alive, he's actually in total remission. Now, there was the Gideon case in Oregon. So Dr. Gideon is a doctor who does assisted suicide, and he said that the law that said that you had to be an Oregon resident to die by assisted suicide was unconstitutional. And he argued that assisted suicide is a form of medical treatment. Now, the state of Oregon never went forward with that case. The state of Oregon instead decided to get rid of the residency requirement. So instead of actually defending their law, they got rid of the residency requirement. Now Dr. Gideon has started an assisted suicide clinic, and he's admitted that he's done assisted suicides on people from the East Coast, and he's done at least one from Texas. So he's willing to take people from anywhere in the U.S. and he'll kill them. Anyway, I ask you to think this through. There's a big push now for assisted suicide by telehealth. So you can imagine that if you were contacting Dr. Gideon, let's say you lived here in Chicago and you wanted to die by assisted suicide, if Dr. Gideon could approve you by telehealth, then you could be approved for assisted suicide, and all you'd have to do is fly to Oregon and die, because you would never have to be there, right? And that's what they're pushing for. Anyway, these cases create a real problem because they're saying that assisted suicide is a form of health care. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you understand what I'm going to when I'm saying if you call it health care, you've got a serious problem? And the reason is right off the bat. They're going to lie to you. They're going to tell you in Illinois that we're going to have all these safeguards. But when you look at the language of the bill, I'm sure they're going to use medical language in the bill, because that's what they're doing now. It's always medical language. If it is considered a form of medical treatment, as they say it is, then how can you limit it? They can say, oh, well, it would only be an 18-year-old who has this medical condition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, think about it. How can you deny a 17-year-old assisted suicide if it's medical treatment? You can't. How can you deny it to someone who's not terminally ill if they're suffering, supposedly, if it's medical treatment? Right? If you're going to call it medical treatment, now there's a whole other question involved with it, and it's called anything that denies you equality to treatment would be considered discrimination. Right? So they know this from the beginning. They know they're writing bills that will expand quickly. I'm not going to get into that. Okay. I want you to know that the Dobbs decision was based actually on the decision called Glucksberg. Many of you who are involved in pro-life realize that. So in 1997, the Supreme Court in the U.S. made its Glucksberg decision. It was a unanimous decision of the Supreme Court. And the Glucksberg decision dealt with assisted suicide. And they said that there's no right to assisted suicide in America, because that's what the assisted suicide lobby was trying to achieve at that time, that there's a right to assisted suicide in America. And the Glucksberg's decision stated that, liberty interests not deeply rooted in the nation's history do not qualify as being protected as a liberty interest. That's what Glucksberg said. And they said that there was no proof in any way that assisted suicide is something of a liberty interest, because it doesn't go back in our history in any way that way. So Glucksberg was a great decision. And remember, Dobbs was based on Glucksberg. So Dobbs said the same thing about abortion. It said that there was that Roe was an incorrect decision based on it claiming something that wasn't true. And it based that on Glucksberg. Now, why is that important? Because recently the Massachusetts Supreme Court was dealing with the Klagler case. And when you looked at the Dobbs decision, you realize that there could not be a right to assisted suicide in Massachusetts or nationally or anywhere. So let's go on about this stuff. The drugs. Some of you don't realize about this, but the assisted suicide lobby's been doing drug experiments for a long time. So how do you die by assisted suicide? Well, they give you 3 drugs. I'm not going to get into it. There's 3 different drugs they use. But they used to use a drug that was a sleeping pill from the 50s. And that sleeping pill was basically delisted a long time ago because you had a problem if you accidentally took too many pills, you died. Not very good. But that's what they were using for assisted suicide. And that drug then was taken off the market, but then it was being used for assisted suicide. The company that produced that drug sold the rights to it to another company, and then the price was jacked way up. So the assisted suicide lobby, around 2015, they started getting together and talking about, we need a cheap way to kill. Now, why is this important to you? Well, when they're talking about assisted suicide in your own state, one thing they're going to avoid talking about is how they actually do assisted suicide. Why do they want to avoid it? Because they want to sell the paradigm that this is, death with dignity, it's quick, it's easy, people die a good death, and it's not true. So the Seattle Times reported in March of 2017, the first second alternative turned out to be too harsh, burning patients' mouths and throats, causing them to scream in pain. So the first drug alternative to Seconal they came up with had a problem that, yes, it was killing people, but it was causing a lot of pain. So obviously that did not follow their view of death with dignity, okay? There was actually 67 people who died that way, so they kept on doing this experiment. And then what they did is they changed the drug combination. They're actually now in the 4th generation of drugs. And the second drug mix led to these long, drawn-out deaths. So they say, oh, well, I guess that doesn't fit either. In fact, the Seattle Times said up to 31 hours, but we know that there was one that was 104 hours. An article published in The Atlantic in January 2019 was interviewing this Robert Wood, who was the medical director for the organization End of Life Washington. Now, why does an assisted suicide group need a medical director? I don't know. They're about killing people, right? I don't know. Anyway, and what did Robert Wood say to The Atlantic? He said, well, with the drug mixture they were using, he says, well, we knew that it was going to put you to sleep, and we were pretty sure it was going to kill you. Well, that makes me feel good, doesn't it? Wonderful. He says, but, it worked out, but with a tragic consequence. There were cases where the chloral hydrate burned people's throats, causing severe pain just as they expected relief. So they were screaming out of this life, and supposedly this was a death with dignity. The Medical Express reported in September of 2020, a little-known secret not publicized by advocates of aid in dying was that while most deaths were speedy, others were very slow. Some patients lingered for 6 to 9 hours, a few more than 3 days. Well, definitely more than 3 days, some of them. So, assisted suicide is not what they appear to be, that they want it to look like. In fact, it's about a lie. But the fact of it is that they want to sell you something it's not. They want to wave a flag that these are deaths with dignity. These are easy deaths. You're not going to suffer. Guess what? It's not true. It is about killing, though. Many people support assisted suicide based on fear of dying a bad death. And obviously, assisted suicide sometimes causes a bad death. So why were they developing these drugs? They needed a cheap way to kill you. That's what they were looking for, the assisted suicide lobby. But on top of it, they were doing human trials. Think about this concept. If you're willing to kill, obviously you're not going to be very worried about your ethics. And think about the concept of doing human trials. When we're doing trials on drugs, you usually do animal trials first. And if it works out on the animals, then you might try it on humans, right? The second thing is, human trials require consent. And I was pointing out that with the situation, people were being approved for assisted suicide. That's true. But they were not being told that they were being part of a human trial. Okay? But of course, ethics don't mean much when you're into killing people. Like, why would you care about a little bit of ethics when you're into killing people? March 14, 2022, the Colorado Sun published an article about Dr. Jennifer Guardiani, who's an assisted suicide doctor in Colorado. And the article was about the fact that she was doing assisted suicide on people with anorexia. What Dr. Guardiani did is she redefined anorexia as a chronic condition, which is a chronic condition. She redefined it as a terminal condition. Now, is it a terminal condition or is it a chronic condition? Well, they want to expand what terminal means in order to expand who can die by assisted suicide. Now, we know in 2021 at least one person died by assisted suicide based on anorexia, because if you look at the Oregon report, it lists why people died. It doesn't tell you how many. So I just know that in the Oregon report, it listed anorexia in 2021. I just don't know how many died by assisted suicide for anorexia in 2021. But, you know, we know, I did some research into this. So the key study on anorexia is a study that was published in 2017, and it's called Recovery from Anorexia and Bulimia, 22-year follow-up. So this was a study that was published in 2017, and it looked at people. It had 246 participants participating in the study over 22 years. And this is considered the study. So I was doing Googling. I know, I'm almost done. That's good. I was Googling to find out what the issue is all about and how to argue it. And so I look at the study, and this is a study that's referred to by all the anorexia and bulimia people who are studying that issue. So what did that study show us? That over 22 years, 62.8% of the participants with anorexia recovered, and 68.2% of the participants with bulimia recovered. Now, sadly, not all of them recovered. Of the 246 participants over 22 years, 18 of those people died. The study did not say that all of them died by either anorexia or bulimia. It didn't say. It just said 18 of the 246 died. That tells me it's a chronic condition, not to say that nobody died by anorexia or bulimia, but what it means is that most of them do not die from anorexia or bulimia over a 22-year period. Clearly, it must be a chronic condition. So let's get into this issue. I think you need to talk about this. We got to talk about what it is. I always say we need to talk about this issue, what it is. This is about killing people. The other side wants you to talk about aid in dying, medical aid in dying, assisted dying, doctor-prescribed death. They want to talk about different things like that, and why do they want you to redefine it? They want you to redefine it because it's easier for people to accept it then. This is about killing people. This is assisting a suicide. It's not a good thing in any way, shape, or form. Canada legalized euthanasia in June of 2016. In a very short time, we've gone from euthanasia for the terminally ill to euthanasia for the chronically ill, now to euthanasia for the mentally ill. Very fast in Canada, okay? And I think you should be using the Canadian stories because, in the past when we were fighting assisted suicide in the U.S., we might have used some Dutch stories because, euthanasia had been going on in the Netherlands and there was some bad stories. But, most Americans would say, yeah, but that's the crazy Dutch. I'm half Dutch, so it's okay, I could say that, right? But, Canada, we're just north of you. We're almost like cousins, whether you like it or not. We're better at hockey, though. I don't know. So in a very short time, we've legalized this and we've expanded it. Now, our government just announced that they're going to delay the implementation of euthanasia for mental illness until next year, but they're not talking about not doing it. Now our government just came up with a report just a few weeks ago saying that they think we should be legalizing euthanasia for children, and for people who put it in their advanced directive. So that means if you become totally incompetent, that if you had put it in your advanced directive, they could still kill you, right? So that means euthanasia without request, right? Even though you put it in your advanced directive, it's really not you requesting it at the time. You might have requested it 10 years earlier. And the Quebec College of Physicians brought up the issue now of euthanasia of newborns. They're saying we should have euthanasia of newborns, but Quebec's always like that. But that's where we're going very fast. And we've had lots of crazy stories. So by changing the law, what did we get? So we changed the law in 2021 that you don't have to be terminally ill, you only have to be chronically ill. So how do they define it? You have to have an irremediable medical condition. I'm sure there must be a few people in this room with an irremediable medical condition. And there's not enough hands going up, but the fact of it is I think most of us have an irremediable medical condition, nothing personal. So what have we had? Well, we had a case in London, Ontario, where I'm from, a man with a fairly substantial disability, and he was told by the hospital he had two choices. He could pay $1,500 a day to stay in the hospital, or he could have euthanasia. Those were his two choices he was offered. His name was Roger Foley. I'm in communication with Roger Foley regularly. He's actually got a case now he's trying to take to the International Criminal Court against the Canadian government. Alan Nichols died by euthanasia in 2019 for mental illness, but it's before we legalized euthanasia for mental illness. I'm not going to get into his story. We had recently a 23-year-old who was approved for euthanasia. He was a diabetic. Now, he ended up living because his mother went ballistic. His mother published the name of the doctor who was going to do the death. She went ballistic in the media, and by the fact that she was just so, most people say, I'll do my best to try and stop the death. No, she went all out, and there was no doctor willing to kill her son after that. But you need to tell these stories. There was a 51-year-old woman with multiple chemical sensitivities. There's a lot of people with chemical sensitivities, but she had a pretty severe case, multiple chemical sensitivities. She died by euthanasia. What did she need? A clean place to live. That's what she needed. She died by euthanasia. We had a veteran of PTSD, a veteran contacting Veterans Affairs, wanting care for his PTSD. What happened? They offered him euthanasia. A woman was approved for euthanasia even though she was unable to get medical treatment. She made it very clear, I don't want euthanasia, I want medical treatment, but because she couldn't get medical treatment, she ended up dying by euthanasia. A person with disabilities was approved for euthanasia even though the only reason he was asking for it was because he was homeless. We had quite a few people now who are people with disabilities who were asking for euthanasia. They were approved based on their disabilities. Remember, irremediable medical condition. That includes almost everybody with a disability. Anyway, they were asking for it based on poverty. So here you have euthanasia based on poverty, homelessness, and unable to get medical treatment. You know, a 20-year-old was approved for euthanasia even though he had an undiagnosed medical condition. You can't make this stuff up. You know, you could write a book and people say, oh, well, that's an extreme case. No, you can't make this stuff up. But we need to talk about what it is. These are not deaths with dignity. The other side wants to describe them as peaceful, quick, painless. We need to talk about how these drug systems actually work. I think that would shock some people, that this is not a death with dignity at all. We need to care for people. We can't be killing people. These issues, they trample on conscience rights. And I mentioned about the California case. Most of the new laws force doctors to be in some way complicit with the law, okay, forcing them to do a referral. They sell this as my body, my choice. I don't know where you've heard that before, my body, my choice. You haven't heard that before? Yeah. That's what they sell it as, but it's a lie. It's not about my body, my choice when somebody's saying, I agree, your life's not worth living, and prescribe to you a lethal drug. A drug cocktail, that is. Assisted suicide is not an autonomous act. It's a lie because it requires a physician, and in some states also nurses can do it, but it requires another person to be directly involved with killing you. Many of these people request assisted suicide also have issues related to their capacity, their ability to request, or the true ability to consent, right? But they're often experiencing hopelessness, not only hope, but you brought up hope, hopelessness, despair, alienation, cognitive distortions. They feel their life lacks meaning, purpose, or value. They might have a significant medical condition, but they feel their life lacks meaning, purpose, or value. Assisted suicide is more about abandonment, not autonomy. It's about abandoning people at the time of their life. We always made the mistake, we talked about vulnerable people when we should have been talking about people at a vulnerable time in their life. Because we all will experience vulnerable times of our life. None of us are immune to this. Okay, none of us are immune to this. This affects all of us. We must work with people from all political points of view. There's no silver bullet. I know I need to be done. People with disabilities have a personal experience. We need to be working with people with disabilities. Absolutely. I'm going to say one other thing. Assisted suicide affects your life. It affects my life. Why? Because you're human. We have to remember what this means. I'm a human being. I'm not like my dog. But there's more to it. When I get home on Sunday night, my dog's going to come to the door wagging her tail. And if I give her a treat, she's going to be all happy. If I take her for a walk, she'll be more happy. She's nice and easy to deal with, isn't she? She's a simple creature. She's made to be a good, simple creature, and she's a beautiful dog. But as a human being, we're different. We are psychological, we're emotional, we're social, we're spiritual, and we're one being. So it's natural when I'm going through a difficult health condition, I might also be affected by that psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. It's normal. And bringing up assisted suicide when I feel or I'm going through feelings of hopelessness and despair, it's not about my free choice now, is it? It's about abandoning me because I'm a human being. And this is what we have to understand. We have to talk about this as what it means to be human. As a human being, this threatens my life. It threatens your life because we have a lot of suffering in our culture because people are suffering alone. Suffering alone is tough. There's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of depression. People have fear. Loss of hope or purpose. These are leading reasons why people are asking for a death. And we're done pretty much. I only brought 7 Fatal Flaws videos with me. It's an excellent video. I don't have to say more about it. It's only $20. I've only got one left, but if you want one, I can send it to you easy enough. And I've got some materials you can take, and we're going to let Hope take over. She might give you more hope.
When we're talking to our lawmakers about this issue, our fellow voters, what message should we use? Should we give a moral argument, a faith-based argument, or something else?
Depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a faith-based person, it doesn't hurt talking from a faith-based point of view. But the problem with our culture is we've become so secular that there's a great division within how people look at things. But I don't think it's impossible for a secular person to be opposed to killing. And I'm saying to you that I do think that sometimes we want to make these issues too complicated. And I think we have to call a spade and say what it is. And we shouldn't be afraid to do that. Now, if you get down to the crux of the issue, let me just tell you quickly. I'm heavily involved in the Knights of Columbus also. In Ontario, I'm the life director for our state of Ontario for the Knights of Columbus. So I go to all those meetings and I was talking, and I give talks, and I was at this state meeting not so long ago with all the district deputies. That means the regional guys, right? And I thought, a pretty darn good talk. I was really had my key thing together. And afterwards, this guy comes up to me and says, "Alex, I just never thought of it that way before." And what did I do? I basically said, I'm opposed to killing people. I said, you guys, we can't get into all these difficult issues sometimes because some people, they're just so, how would you say, they're having so many difficulties dealing with the fear of dying like Uncle Joe died. I'm not talking about Joe Scheidler, sorry. Dying like someone died, they have some fear of dying a bad death. And they're dealing with that in their minds. And I said, I think we have to get down to the crux of it and be opposed to killing people. But then we have to also be about caring for people. And I tell you, we have to be more concerned than ever before. As this culture becomes this way, we recognize the lonely lady next door. And let's say the lonely lady next door, who may have had 3 kids, and now her husband's passed away, and she's got 3 kids living in Timbuktu, never visiting her, and because of her health conditions, she can't really get out anymore. We have to recognize that if she's having significant health problems, and you've got legal assisted suicide as an example, that her life's threatened by this. Someone saying to her, "Oh, maybe you should have assisted suicide," might sound pretty good in her ear. But if she's your neighbor, you need to be caring, being there with her and talking to her. And if someone in your church, we shouldn't be immune to the concept of the fact that people in your churches are going to die by assisted suicide if you legalize it. It's not because they're terrible people, it's because they're human beings. It's love that changes the world. Because you cared enough for someone, you loved them enough that you actually were being with them, you might be able to save a life. Yeah.
Another question.
Thank you. I think I know the answer, but I want everyone to hear your answer to this question. Do you think if they start calling this a medical treatment, there are going to be issues about privacy with young people and their parents' knowledge of what they may be discussing?
Yeah. Well, as soon as you call it medical treatment, there's another problem because, as I already tried to allude to you, you can't just say to someone, "Oh, now we have this new legal medical treatment." Let's say they legalize assisted suicide in Illinois and they define it as medical treatment. So now you've got a new legal medical treatment in Illinois, but it's only for this person and that person, that's it. You can't say that. So they might write a law that looks tight in order to get it through the legislature, but it won't take them very long to have to amend it. Now, let me give you a quick example, and I know that there's only so much time for questions that people are leaving me because I'm Canadian, but anyway. Connecticut has had a bill 10 years in a row, and they failed 10 years in a row. So if you look at the current Connecticut bill, I was just reading it the other day, and I just wrote about it just like 2 days ago. That's the tightest darn bill there is anywhere I've ever seen in America. It's got definitions for everything. So you would say, oh, well, why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that because they know they've failed 10 years in a row in a Democrat state to get this through, so they're going to give you something as tight as possible. Is that their intention? No, their intention is to legalize assisted suicide because they know in a year or two they can just change it. Yes?
I know there have been cases in some states where the death penalty was either postponed or terminated by the fact that they were concerned about how the drugs were affecting the people, or the quality of the drugs that were being used to kill them in the death penalty.
Yes.
Is there anything there that we can take advantage of in terms of pointing out about what the nature of these drugs are? I assume the drugs must be very similar, if not the same, that's going on.
You're absolutely right. So they're using the same drugs, and I did talk too long in the beginning, yappy a bit, so I killed my speech. But anyway, but the fact of it is how do you die by assisted suicide? It's a death by drowning. So how do we know it's a death by drowning? Because they don't do autopsies on people who died by assisted suicide, because everyone knows how you died when you died by assisted suicide. But on everyone who dies by capital punishment, they all have an autopsy done, every single one. So we know actually how they're dying, and they're dying by drowning. So what these drugs do is they stop the lungs from working. The lungs quickly fill up with fluid, and the person dies of drowning. That's how they die. And so it's important to know that, because they're thinking, oh, well, this drug is going to shut down their heart. It's going to be a death with dignity. They're not going to. No. What they do is they put you in coma first. It's true. They give you a drug that puts you into coma. But the drug that's the killer drug is to shut down your lungs. And we wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for the death penalty, because they do use the same drugs. Now, why do you have failure with the death penalty? Because they're not using enough drug, and they're doing it in the wrong way. I hate to say it to you, but I've been doing this issue for so long. I know how to kill you. I wish I didn't, but I know how to kill you. And they're pretty slick about it in Canada, actually.
All right, a final question.
Okay. I'm interested in whether or not the line being moved to disabled babies, children that are born with different health conditions, and how, are you seeing that, or is it just staying with the adults and the, teenagers? Like
So in the Netherlands, they have something called the Groningen Protocol. So they're doing euthanasia of newborns in the Netherlands. Now, it's not that common because, of course, most women in the Netherlands will have a prenatal screening test. And so obviously there's very few babies born with disabilities in the Netherlands. Nonetheless, sometimes the screening test wasn't accurate, and the woman had the baby, and then the baby was born with spina bifida or something, and she ends up killing the baby after birth, okay? So Quebec physicians have proposed that we do the same thing in Canada. Now remember, this whole concept of euthanasia and assisted suicide is sold to us as consenting adults. But once you remove consent, who else can't consent? Now, I'm already saying that they're talking about removing consent anyway. They're talking about pre-consent now. They're talking about putting in your power of attorney document so that if you became incompetent, you could still be lethally injected. That's what they're talking about in my country. Well, once you remove consent, who else can't consent? People with dementia can't consent. People with Alzheimer's can't consent. Certain people with disabilities can't consent. So once you remove consent from the issue, it becomes wholesale killing, and that's exactly where they go when they do that, yes.
Let me wrap up with this. Who stands to gain from this? Big Pharma?
No, Big Pharma
Health
doesn't
insurance
gain.
companies?
Yeah. Well, obviously the health insurance companies gain from it. In Canada, they've saved, umpteen millions of dollars by killing you. But it's not Big Pharma, because Big Pharma would make more money if you keep alive, because obviously if you're going to continue to need drugs for a long period of time, that's where they make their money. But it's also philosophical. You have people who are philosophically our enemy. We have to remember philosophically who's the #1 philosopher in the world right now. Peter Singer. Now, you and I don't agree with Peter Singer. I'm a Thomist myself, but you and I don't believe him. Peter Singer believes it's really wonderful to be able to kill a baby in the first, 9 months after birth is fine. Right? Peter Singer believes it's okay to kill by euthanasia. Peter Singer thinks it's perfectly good to kill your disabled child. Oh yeah, he thinks it's all fine and good. So think about it. And someone with dementia, Alzheimer's, absolutely, because they've lost their cognitive certain level, they can be killed. Peter Singer thinks that way. Well, the world follows Peter Singer. We shouldn't be ignorant about that, right? It's sad.
What about governments who are hard-pressed financially to take
Well,
care
yeah,
of the
the
poor.
Canadian government saved massive money on it because we have universal health care. So, yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
But they won't talk about that. They won't talk about that, but it's true.
Okay. Do you have a website?
Yeah, Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. It's easy to find. Just Google me. If you grab my newsletters now, you'll see my email address. I usually bring my cards, but, I forgot. What are you going to do with me? But it's just a crazy Canadian. But anyway, I'm easy to find. You'll notice that if you Google me, I come up with like how many thousands of hits. So anyway, very good. And I've got the largest blog in the world on this issue. If you want to know anything about euthanasia and assisted suicide, I've published over 5,000 articles myself. Thank you.